Before we go any further, I want to make sure everybody's sleeves are perfect. I don't want you to be cutting into your fashion fabric unless we know everything is good to go. So I did neglect to make something clearer when we did the two-piece sleeve, and that was keeping track of the underarm. So if you go back to your plot on your full-size pattern, what I want you to do is to take your undersleeve and put it back down. Make sure again that you have your back at the right spot and line it up in the area that you drafted it and record this information here, which is the exact underarm. So that's right down the center of the sleeve. That's where your underarm is, okay? So when you go to sew, and again, I flipped this piece over, so I'm going to have to turn this over and see through to see exactly where my notch is. Notches are really so important. So when you actually sew, this notch will line up with the side seam. So you're not matching up seams, you're matching a notch to the side seam. So that's really important to keep track of. And I noticed some of you on your muslins missed that, and that was my fault. I should have made that clearer when we were doing the drafting. Okay, so let's talk now about walking the sleeve. So let's walk the front of the jacket first. So I'm going to take my undersleeve and I'm going to identify the front, which I know is here because I know my notches indicate the back of the sleeve from my drafting. So I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to line up that notch with the underarm. And again, just so you know that the black line is my fashion fabric line. The other lines are where I adjusted for the lining. So I'm going to take this and walk it. And when I get to that point, without the seam allowance, that my undersleeve ends, I'm going to put a notch there. So now I know when I go to sew it that I'm lining up this notch with the underarm and this notch with this seam. Okay? Then what I'm going to do is to take the front of my sleeve. I'm going to line it up where I left off, where I made that notch for the undersleeve, and now I'm going to walk this curve. See if I can do this left-handed. I'm actually going to have you move the notches. So when you get to mid-armhole, I want you to put a notch in your sleeve and a matching notch in the body. And we're going to eliminate this notch on both the sleeve. So both the sleeve and the body, the front torso, because I want to talk about gathering. So I'm going to continue to walk my sleeve till I get to the shoulder. And when I get to the shoulder, I'm going to put a mark. I'm not going to put a notch. I'm just going to mark it because I'm going to use it to measure my ease. Okay? So that's my front sleeve. I'm going to do the same thing with the back. I'm going to take my undersleeve and again make sure that it's clear what's the front and the back, and again that's the beauty of notches. My notches indicate where the back is. I'm going to line it up at the underarm seam of the jacket body, and I'm going to walk that and I'm going to put a notch. This notch will only have one part to it. Okay, typically the back has two, but this notch at the underarm has just one part to it. So that's my undersleeve. That's where the seam of my undersleeve is going to match up to this notch there. Then what I'll do is to take the upper sleeve, take the back and line it up where I left off with my undersleeve, and I'm going to walk it. And again, I'm going to ignore the notches that are there, and I'm going to come mid-armhole again, and this time I'm going to put in 2 notches on the body that I've now moved to mid-armhole. So I'm coming across, pretty directly across from the sky, okay? And then, of course, I'm going to put it on this pattern as well. This is a 2-notcher so that you know it's the back of the sleeve. So I have 1 notch where the under sleeve lines up, the under sleeve and upper sleeve seam lines up with the body, and then 2 notches for your gathering. And then you're going to continue to walk. And again, when you get to the shoulder, you're going to put a mark. The distance now from mark to mark, again, these are not notches, these are marks. These 2 marks, you're going to measure it. It needs to be anywhere from 1 1/4 inches to 2 inches long. If it's any more, your sleeve head is too big, and you'll need to make adjustments where you either pull out the corners, or you slash and adjust it in through here. If it's less, you would slash it and open it up, pull out these corners. If it's more, then you want to bring them in, so you would slash and bring it in and bring these points in. Again, if it's a lot, then you really need to spread it out. So a lot of times on a tailored jacket, if it's not that much either way, plus or minus, I will absolutely do it in the cap. But if I get to be 1 inch, then I'm definitely spreading it out between slashing this and opening it and pulling out my corners a little bit so that my sleeve cap shape stays in balance. Okay, so now I have my notches for where my sleeve sets in and matches against my body. These 2 new notches are now going to be used to place your gathering points. And I'll talk about that in the next video. Now let's talk about setting the sleeve in. So I have my pattern piece. I'm going to add 1/2 inch all the way around and cut it out, cut 2 of them out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run 2 rows of basting from your newly moved notches back around to the front so that it looks like this. Let's see if I can show you, flatten this out a little bit. So I'm in my seam allowance here, my 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that when I sew, I'm going to be sewing right about here. Okay? 2 rows of basting is super important. If you have 1 row of basting and you pull it, where this gathers is going to shift back and forth. So when you have 2 of them, what happens is it stabilizes your gathering so that your little tucks that happen when you pull these. Let's see if I can do this other side easier. Yeah, this will be a little easier on this side. 2 rows of basting, no back tacking. And then when you have 2 rows and you pull, it's going to pull all the seam allowance at the same time and just keep it nice and straight. If you have 1, when you go to sew it, it's going to be able to shift back and forth. So 2 rows is going to give you a nice, stabled gathering so that when you get inside to sew this, you're able to work these little tucks out so you get a perfectly flat seam. And again, the purpose of the gathering is for you to create a curve, really not unlike a dart that goes around a muscle, or the bone and the muscle, so that you should be able to get your fist in there and have it go up over the fist and come out. Okay, here's a sample of a set-in sleeve. So once I pull my gathers together, then I'm going to set them into the body of the jacket, line everything up. So I'm going to line up all of my notches, my underarm, everything, and then I'm going to sew. So I've got everything lined up here. I'm going to sew on the inside. So I'm going to have the body of the jacket down and the sleeve on top, and I'm going to stitch on the inside, because that way when I get to the curves, hopefully you learned this in construction too. When I get to my gathers, not the curves, but to my gathers, I can work them through. So you can actually make yourself a little ditch, particularly with wool. Wool is going to work with you, not against you. So you're going to take and stitch it almost up, almost by lifting it upwards and pushing out those gathers, but yet they're still there, so that when you're done, you have a nice sleeve head, something that's going to be curved and belled and go over the arm here. So you've got a nice bicep curve that's happening there, okay? So 2 rows of basting. Pull them very gently, line up. Typically what I do is I tack my underarm, I tack my shoulder, and then I tack where the end of my 2 darts are. So I tack it down or pin it down in 4 spots, and then I gather it to fit into the curve, and then I stitch it. Sometimes I go around twice on a sleeve. A lot of times I don't. It depends on the fabric. It depends on what I'm making. In a tailor jacket, I absolutely would only go around once. Make sure that you back tack at the underarm, and that's how to set in your sleeve properly.